water, our most treasured natural resource. It's easy for us to assume that we have an endless supply of clean, fresh water. On an average annual basis, Canada's rivers discharge close to 7% of the world's renewable water supply, while having less than 1% of the world's population. While abundant, Canada's freshwater resources are not evenly distributed across the country, with more than half of this water draining northward into the Arctic Ocean and Hudson Bay, away from the 85% of our population that's concentrated along Canada's southern border. This is evident in regions of Canada such as the Eastern Slopes, located in Alberta's Rocky Mountains and foothills. On the western edge of Alberta, a rocky border of snow-capped peaks forms the Continental Divide. Clean, cold waters from glaciers, snow, and springs flow eastward, soaking forested valleys, bathing rolling foothills, and quenching windswept prairies, supplying 90% of Albertans with water for everything from drinking water to irrigation, industry, and recreation. This region provides an essential service to Canada's prairie provinces, and how we care for it can have a huge effect on some of Canada's most historically expensive natural disasters, such as droughts and floods. With one region being so critical to life on the prairies, it's important to ask ourselves just how secure and safe is our water supply.
This is where it all starts. This is where water comes from. It doesn't come from a tap.
Most of our water that feeds the prairies really comes out of the eastern slopes and the mountains here. So some people have called them the water towers, but really all this area is a big, big sponge. It receives more precipitation than areas further east, but it also keeps those amounts of precipitation longer and releases them more slowly so that we still have a nice supply of water during the entire summer, even though it may not be raining. So what we have here, it's that narrow band of forested area in Alberta, which was originally set aside over 100 years ago for timber production, but also safeguarding the water that we have, because even then already the people realized that we need these areas to be the sponge, hold the water, feed the prairies.
A watershed is an area of land that drains rainwater, snow, and groundwater into one location, such as a stream, lake, or wetland. We all live in a watershed, regardless of how far we are away from a body of water. Therefore, the health of our watersheds, from the headwaters to the drinking tap, depends on the choices that we make on the landscape.
Personal responsibility is critical in this. I mean, it can be, it's not my problem, it's someone else's problem until it's everybody's problem. And eventually that will come right back to you.
We've talked a lot over the last 30 years about ecological goods and services. There is no more important one than clean, fresh water. And I think if all of us could just have those bigger understandings of what the eastern slopes do for all of our communities, I think that we would all be in better shape.
If you lost this water source, for example, if you took away all of the forests, all of these sponges that we have up here, it would have a devastating impact onto the prairies. It has an impact on the local weather that you have, how much rain is coming down further east, because all that evapotranspiration that happens with the forest transfers the water further east. So whether it is water that flows off as a stream or whether it is water that is sent down further east through cloud cover, it's all interconnected and it's all very important.
The real challenge is to balance the needs of multiple species, multiple land uses, right? So we have oil and gas, we have forestry, we have agriculture, we have fish, we have recreationalists, but this is also where you get drinking water from. And people tend to think that Canada has unlimited water resources, which is not the case at all. We only really have one water resource. It flows from the headwaters through to the bottom, right? And we all share that. So how do you manage those things upstream of you so that you have the water you need, of the quality you need?
Human land uses are impacting the health of our watershed by damaging the natural systems that help with water pollution, filtration, and water absorption. These areas adjacent to streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands, where the plants and soils are strongly influenced by the presence of water, are referred to as riparian zones. The Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society, more commonly known as Cows and Fish, is an organization that works with landowners and other land users to help connect land use decisions to their impacts on water quality.
The role of the riparian zone on the landscape is to act as a buffer and as a transition between what's going on in the uplands and what's happening out in the open water. So that area is wetter than dry, but drier than wet. It acts as a sponge because it collects water, grows different types of plants that only like to be right near water. And it's a filter, it's a buffer, and it's a place to capture some of the things that when they're on the land are great, but once they get through and into the water can cause problems like algae blooms and excessive nutrients. 2 to 5% of Alberta's settled area is riparian. Over 80% of all of our wildlife rely on a riparian area for all or part of their life cycle. It's critical for nesting, for traveling, for protection, for obviously food, water, and shelter. When human actions start to change that, so whether it's livestock grazing or ATV trails or urban development, if we start to create more bare ground or shift the types of plants that are growing there, then the ability of that riparian area to filter and trap and slow down water starts to change because the pieces of the puzzle are no longer there to allow it to trap and store and soak in.
We're not alone in it, and I think the most important lesson that we've learned is that conservation and good agricultural practices are on parallel tracks. If our cows are here and they're happy, there's a good chance that the moose are as well. If the moose are happy and there's elk here, then there's bird watchers and hunters and bow hunters that are also happy because they have access to all of that. And it all starts to work together if we can continuously improve it. This is a complete system. We have keystone species on our place. The reason the grizzly bears are here is because there are limber pines here, and there's Clark nutcrackers here, and there's squirrels here, and they all work together. And if you take one of those away, the others start to fail. So bottom line is, how do we look after that?
Maintaining natural systems isn't just about conserving habitat, it's also about the sustainability of our agricultural systems and drinking water. With the increasing demand for freshwater resources and increasing variability of our water supply, we can look to nature for solutions. Riparian ecosystems are networks of life-supporting processes, the sum of which is greater than any one part, and a reminder that strength and resilience comes from working together. Beaver, for example, are a keystone species that can enhance riparian habitat, helping to capture, store, and filter water. Cows and fish, as well as other conservation groups, ranchers, industry, recreation users, and communities, all play a critical role in caring for Alberta's watersheds by partnering and taking proactive steps to prevent the loss or damage of sensitive riparian areas.
We try to live in harmony with the other species that are here and try to protect what is important here. We've done rangeland health assessments, riparian assessments have been done by Cows and Fish, and we see all of them as our report cards.
When we first came here, we were pretty naive and green about how to graze properly. You know, learning more and more about the grasslands. We've been trying to adapt a principle of trying to mimic when the buffalo were here.
Our cows and our systems are just our tools. Our electric fences are tools. The grass is kind of a tool. It's a filter, but it's a tool.
When we do something simple like just fence off an area and we prevent livestock from entering the river, we see this incredible regeneration and just the ability for rivers to heal themselves, to move through time, and to revegetate naturally is pretty impressive, and we're lucky that we have that to work with us and for us.
In many parts of the eastern slopes, there are places where significant damage has already occurred.
There's a lot of activities that are happening on this landscape. So I think definitely with that cumulative pressure on the landscape, balanced with the critical habitat and the sensitivity of our source water, I think that's why we're really trying to promote stewardship of these areas.
Riparian areas rely on plants to hold the soil and banks together, protecting the land from the erosive power of water and keeping these areas intact. Healthy riparian areas are critical for maintaining the clean, cold water that native trout require. Streams within the eastern slopes are the last stronghold for many of Alberta's native fish.
This is the Beaverlodge River, the mighty Beaverlodge River, which used to be home of the best Arctic grayling fishing in all of Alberta. And the Arctic grayling was a beautiful trophy fish with a beautiful dorsal fin. And up around 1985, the Arctic grayling went way down.
Arctic grayling are very sensitive to changes in their environment. They are cold water fish species, so they need a specific temperature, and they also need high dissolved oxygen to be able to live in the Beaverlodge River. And so the land use practices that we saw over the past few decades were contributing to poorer water quality, and as a result we saw less and less Arctic grayling coming up the Beaverlodge River to spawn. And then finally in 1994, that was when the last Arctic grayling was seen in this river.
Everything is interconnected. West Slope cutthroat trout is an indicator for watershed health because they really require very, very clean and cold water. They depend on all these invertebrates that can only thrive in clean and cold water. So if you have a lot of sediment, you destroy the food source for the fish, and then you also impact the spawning areas for the fish. When you have a loss of fish, what it really tells you is that your water quality is going down the tubes, which isn't in our own interest. I think one thing we need to keep in mind is it takes about 1,000 years to build like 1 inch of soil. And so if you see like a rut that is a foot deep, that's a lot of soil that we have lost. And it just takes an incredible amount of time to restore. Bioengineering is using natural plant materials to restore areas that have been disturbed. So you use plant material that is native to the area where you're doing the restoration.
This site has been kind of on our radar for a few years. It was a designated trail. There was a lot of erosion happening, so we worked with our local partners to kind of start some restoration.
Willows bind the soil. They are incredibly good at it. And they are also very easy to propagate. So you can take a cutting and cut it into 3-4 pieces. And then you put it into a hole, close the hole neatly around it. And if you did it right, then it will grow.
We can reestablish a riparian zone until it really fully establishes and then continues to absorb enough nutrients that we see the levels drop in the river. Yeah, that's years. We're talking about years for sure, right? If not decades. So it's slow, and that's why it's exciting to see that the water quality that we're monitoring is getting better now, because it is the result of decades of work by a lot of different people.
It's a balance that's tough to put together, but I think we can do it by working together. We aren't living and working in a lot of the communities that we're engaged with. We're often a guest. We're invited in to provide information and provide some potential solutions to something that a community or an individual is faced with. And so having relationships with local producer champions or people that are sort of leaders in the community is really important, because they can help either ignite a spark around their neighbors or can bring people together at an individual level.
I mean, water is life. So, making sure that people understand the precious resource that they have on their property, in their backyard, Just making that awareness and that connection to the water and the watershed. It's really important that people understand that.
One thing is clear: clean and accessible water is essential to human health, food production, a stable economy, and the environment. Healthy riparian areas clean our water, create drought and flood resiliency, and create recreational and economic opportunities for our communities and for our province. In order to take care of and protect areas like the Eastern Slopes, we must challenge our assumption that our water will always remain safe and secure. Caring for watersheds and riparian areas is not just a conservation group issue. It's about all of us. And in order to ensure its health, we must recognize our own role.
I think we have removed ourselves way too much from the natural environment as humans. You know, we go out here into the natural environment and then we go back into the city and we close the door and all of the windows, and we have, to a large extent, probably lost our ability to be a part of nature.
I think that it's really important for us as humans to recognize what Mother Nature does for us, and then how we can respect the gifts that she gives us always. This is where water comes from. This is where food is produced. If we can learn to work with her, we can produce healthy food here, and we do.
We're part of this living network. So if we don't take care of our piece and nobody takes care of theirs, then eventually we're left with nothing, and we're left with a great big mess. We have an opportunity to leave our mark. And I guess at the end of the day, it's just the question of what mark do you want to leave behind?